I think the beauty of neurodiversity and this
Yeah.
movement is like, you do you. Like, yes, that was important to you and for you. That makes total sense that it was, and good for you. Like, you identify with something that and it served you really well. And like, I'm happy for you,
Yeah.
like, and it doesn't have to mean a single thing to anybody else.
Welcome to That's Me, a podcast about autistic lives unfiltered. I'm your host, Corey Andreas, a late diagnosed ADHD therapist, advocate, writer, and speaker, and someone on a mission to change the way the world sees autism, one real story at a time. You know that moment when someone describes your exact experience and something in you goes, wait, that's me. That's where this podcast begins. You're here for a reason. Maybe your neurodivergence went unnoticed your whole life. Maybe every therapist you ever saw told you it was just anxiety. Maybe what you thought was depression was actually autistic burnout and nobody had the language for it. I've watched it happen in my own office and at my unmasking retreats. That moment when everything suddenly makes sense. This is neurodivergence. The world thinks it knows what autism looks like, and that picture often leaves us completely out. For those of us who mask so well, we were missed even by the professionals. So skip the textbooks, the outdated DSM, and the stereotypes. This is where you hear it from the people living it. And the professionals we bring in, they're evolving with us, not holding on to outdated ideas that left us behind. Here you'll find real stories from real people. We'll explore the full neurodivergent experience, the confusion, the overwhelm, the cost of being missed and misunderstood, and the joy that comes with finally finding people who see you. I'm so glad you're here. We have a special guest today. Jenna Goldstein is here with us. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm psyched.
I have been waiting for this day. This is one of my most exciting people to talk to because you have intersected in the world of Corey in very many ways, and I can't wait to talk about all of them.
I'm grateful for each of them. Yes.
And I'm hoping I do not try to keep you here for 6 hours because we could talk about everything. So the beginning of the Jenna and Corey story begins with Rabbi Shoshana and the PDA Safe Circle. So I sort of tackled her at a conference immediately after. It was like, you will be my friend. I just thought that everything she was doing was amazing. We started talking about, our backgrounds and all those things. And she was like, you have to meet Jenna immediately. Like, it was one of the first things she told me when we talked outside of the conference. She was like, you two have so much in common. So I would love to talk about you and all the things. So my understanding is that you were working in the schools as a school psychologist and you made the great exit to start doing your own thing. So tell us a little bit about your background in education.
Yeah, so I was a school psychologist for almost 15 years. It became, I guess, progressively untenable. By that, I just mean that kind of philosophically, the school systems in general and I were just going in totally different directions in our thinking and worldviews about humans and children and how we treat one another, like really fundamental, basic things that were impossible to kind of compromise on or like meet in the middle about. It got to the point where I realized that, there was no amount of change I was going to be able to make in my lifetime in the schools that was going to satisfy my basic principles and must-haves for how I move through my job. That's when I developed this idea for my practice and really got excited about having the freedom to practice in a way that fully aligned with my beliefs and my values. And I think I was kind of doing that already in the schools, but just getting a lot of pushback, um, as you can imagine. And I know as if you've experienced yourself,
Yes.
quite liberating to be able to, operate in a way that feels right and to get kind of feedback from the world that aligns with that as opposed to more punishing kind of feedback.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yes. And it's sort of like you have to work within the rules of the school system, but what you're doing is not helping anyone. And so you're having to kind of like play a lot of games just to do what's right. Is that how it
Right.
felt for you?
Yeah, totally. It got to the point where I felt like I was just speaking a completely different language and we were operating on two different planets. And so the child that we would, a coworker and I or an administrator and I would be looking at, we would see completely differently and therefore have totally different ideas about what should happen next for that child. And it was like culturally, linguistically, philosophically, ideologically, like on every kind of in every realm, we were on totally different pages. And so that would be difficult in any context, but particularly when it resonates on a personal level, like the children in my school who are neurodivergent, disabled, and otherwise, I see myself in them. I see my own children in them, and it was really painful on a lot of levels to be confronted with what I viewed as mistreatment, misunderstanding, and really punishment in a lot of ways for being who they are and who I was and am, who my children are.
Yeah.
So it was too painful to go on that way.
I worked throughout my career with the schools. I always had a school psychologist that I worked closely with. In the best cases, it was the greatest working relationship where, you
Hmm.
have somebody like with the school social worker and the psychologist are naturally kind of teaming up on a lot of
Yeah.
things. And then in the worst scenarios, it was just the most dividing, uncomfortable thing where you'd be begging them to see something they didn't want to see or
Hmm.
begging them to look for something and do something. And that is where, the squeaky wheel is not appreciated at the
Yeah.
table. So
Right.
I wonder for you, like, do any particulars stand out that were really painful or traumatic for you to sit and kind of watch happen?
I think it was like the general kind of pathologizing of children's ways of being, and then the attempts to convert, override, intervene in what was otherwise going to be just a healthy, whole human, then like the attempts to help actually fracture that human and in their practical daily lives and their sense of self. And so it was like the persistent misunderstanding and pathologizing of diverse kids' ways of being
Yeah.
um, was so painful because you see the potential for each human to be whole and joyful and to expand and grow and the adults who purportedly want to help them just becoming the greatest impediments to that.
I remember so many times sitting at IEP teams hearing people say, well, what difference would it make if we coded them as autistic? Or what difference would it make if they had an IEP and things like that? And I'm thinking, if we're really asking that question, should we even be at the table right now? I mean, that in and of
Right.
itself is mind blowing to me. Like, if we understood that their brain and body work totally differently, would it really change anything? Yes, it would change
Right.
everything.
Right. And if it wouldn't, then we have such a significant problem
Yeah.
which is what you're saying. I mean, yeah, sometimes the questions that are being asked reflect the degree of ignorance and misunderstanding and at a certain point in 2020, 2025, like it becomes a degree of willful ignorance, and that's where
Yes.
it becomes untenable because there isn't even a good faith desire to engage and challenge one's own thinking and think about and own that we all have blind spots and implicit
Mhm.
bias. Like if we can't have that least bit of humility, then it's really dangerous and reckless, I think, to be in positions
Yeah.
of power, which
100%.
adults are over children.
Yeah, I noticed that amongst the social workers too, and not just in the issue of neurodiversity, but there were certainly so many times when we had big meetings with all the social workers where people would say, "Well, I don't really know anything about that population," or "I don't really know anything about X, Y, Z," and fill in the blank with whatever group.
Right.
And I just remember saying, I don't really think that we have the luxury of saying that. Like, that is
Right.
not an okay thing to say anymore
Right.
about any group. So it's really hard when you're the one saying, like, we have to do better, we have to do better, we have to learn more. And not everybody wants to learn more. There's a lot of
Right.
outdated systems and outdated thinking. And, even the idea of how long we go to school and what the school day looks like and how many subjects we learn. We've been doing this
Yep.
forever. And I so many times wondered, is there even a reason why we have to do school this way? Because I
Right.
think the
Right.
answer is no.
No, it's like the schools seem to be to me like the least self-conscious system. Like they're not concerned
Mhm.
with self-reflection and critical
Yes.
thinking and owning the universal truth that nothing and no one has like maxed out in their goodness or like correctness, to just kind of grapple with the knowledge that we always have room to improve,
Yeah.
and to tune into the constituents of the system who are saying like this is harming me, this isn't good enough. This is failing me. It just seems like a complete echo chamber or like bubble of a system in our
Yeah.
schools where they're just looking for information that confirms they're already doing everything right. And
Yes.
that's
Yes.
so dangerous.
Yeah. And I think one of the traits I love most about autistic people in general is that we call out things that don't make any sense.
Yep.
And so I think I remember becoming really aware very early on in my career of just how many things didn't make any sense, were illogical, and how much power was involved in the equation and just watching it happen, watching how a principal or an IEP chair could make a decision that would alter the course of that kid's entire educational
Yep.
life
Yep.
or prevent them from getting screened, prevent them from getting help. And seeing how, I don't know if you ever saw this happen, but, maybe you get a report from an outside provider that recommends the kid gets certain accommodations and
Hmm.
watching how fast everybody at the team was immediately like, absolutely not. You don't get to come in here and tell us what to do in the school. You're just a psychologist.
Right.
What?
They're just so fragile.
Yeah.
And it's really that, like, that insecure stance, that defensive stance is again just a reckless, negligent kind of operating style for people in power, which the kind of childism that's baked into schools is another invisible force that isn't named and investigated and
Yeah.
challenged. It's just a status quo that's kind of happily accepted by the people it benefits, the
Yeah.
adults.
So, one thing that I think people probably don't know a whole lot about is the idea of identification of autism, or whether it's autism, PDA, any of the associated kind of big names that would be important when you're thinking about how someone learns and socializes and gets along with other people. And something I heard a lot from parents is, hey, if my kid was autistic, the school would tell me, their teachers would tell me, somebody would tell me. And I would love to hear your take on that. And just so you could explain to people what that process is actually like in the schools.
Yeah, in many cases, I have personal experience with the schools forbidding professionals from wondering about or pursuing the question of whether a child's autistic, and then forbidding professionals from sharing their impressions in that regard with parents. It is absolutely not the case that you can trust that schools are in any way equipped to
Mhm.
identify whether your child is autistic and then to trust that they would tell you their honest kind of impressions in that regard. The schools that I have the most experience with are woefully unequipped to identify autistic humans because they're operating with the complete wrong definition of what it is to be autistic. And
Mhm.
so if we have the wrong definition, then we're not going to see clearly when it's in front of us. And so I have a lot of experience of identifying autistic kids and explaining to colleagues and administrators and parents why I believe that human is autistic and using an inside out kind of understanding of and definition of what it is to be autistic in terms of how that person experiences the world and spaces and people, and that's just not the conversation that people are used to having around what it is to be autistic. They're used
Mhm.
to someone's outward way that they move their body and converse and regulate their body, not that they recognize it as such, but those things kind of standing out to them in some non-normative way that impacts other people or inconveniences other people, makes others
Yeah.
uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And typically all of those things need to be mixed with a high level of distress for anyone to regard it as signs of being autistic.
And mostly distress to the people around them and not necessarily distress to the kiddo.
Sure, any of the above,
Yeah.
right. So,
Yeah.
when I come and try and disentangle being autistic from being distressed or being autistic from inconveniencing other people,
Yeah.
that wasn't a welcome reframe because we
Yeah.
have so much bias in our society, so much prejudice and stigma around non-normativity. And so certainly that includes being autistic,
Yeah.
as a way of being human, that's non-normative, not, valued and understood.
Mhm.
And so, unfortunately, yeah, our schools are just not well positioned at this point, I think, by design
Mhm.
to identify autistic kids.
Yeah, I've had that thought too. It's been very interesting watching my husband go through this process with one of our kiddos
Mhm.
because he's never had to do this before. He has no background in the schools, and it's like it's like going to the zoo the first time with your kiddo. Like, wow, you're seeing this through someone's eyes who has never been here before. And
Yeah.
I think it has shaped my attitude towards education in so many ways that I have to check myself before I even sit in a meeting anymore. But
Yeah.
my belief is that they often don't want to help. And I know that because I was in it. I
Yeah.
was in many, many schools and, in the meetings where they're like, oh, this parent really wants us to do XYZ, but like, we don't have time for that. We don't have staff for that. Like, we need to tell them we don't see what they see. I mean, you see
Right.
these horrible things. So watching my husband go through it, he came home after, meeting after meeting after meeting and probably 2 years of this. And I remember him coming home one day and he said, they really don't want to help, do they? And I'm like, well, yeah, that's the problem. And he's like, no, I mean, every time we go and they let the clock run out of the meeting and they say, we're going to come back and we're going to come back and we're going to come back. And he goes, and every time we come back, we do nothing. And he's like, every time it's just like, how about this? And they're like, oh, unfortunately, we don't have time for that. He's like, it's been years now at this point, and who knows to get a meeting when things first start. Most people don't know how to engage
Right.
in the process. And so
Right.
if you don't realize that this is a game and it's legal and it's really a game of systems and power and all of that, by the time you're asking for help, so much time has been wasted. I've seen him, just a mess after these meetings because he's like, it feels like they just want to be right more than they want to help my kid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's he experienced the disillusionment that many of us have, and,
Yeah.
it's that in and of itself is very upsetting and difficult, never mind the implications in real kind of daily life for your
Yeah.
child or whoever is being discussed.
In schools when, best case scenario, I guess, what would it look like for a kid that maybe the school does see something? What is the process like where kids do get identified and do get services? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Sure, I mean, at best, you have evaluators who have learned in the last 5 years from autistic people, professionals and otherwise, what it is to be autistic, and so they recognize that, in their evaluation process. They're asking the right questions and looking through that kind of clarified lens, in order to identify the child's neurotype accurately, and
Mhm.
so best case scenario, if and when that happens, an IEP is developed that considers the way that that human experiences the world and
Mhm.
particularly the school environment. And there's a whole host of ways we can modify spaces and activities in order to be accessible and supportive of that human and their nervous system. And so that's ideally the conversation that the team, including the parents, as the recognized experts on the child, second to the child themselves,
Mhm.
that conversation can happen collaboratively and kind of comprehensively to think through because school is not just, performance on various assessments. It's
Mhm.
thousands of hours in a
Yeah.
dynamic, complex landscape
Yeah.
that requires a lot of thoughtful design and management, especially when the default ways of managing and designing those spaces and activities don't suit and many times harm your child.
And at worst, what happens when a kiddo doesn't get identified in your experience?
Oh, they continue to be judged as willfully fill in the blank,
Mhm.
disobedient, defiant, weird, immature. That's a classic
Yeah.
framing. Something where we can place the blame within the child
Or the parent.
or the parent, ideally
Or the
both.
parent. We love to blame
Typi-
parents.
Typically both, right? And then work to coerce and shame that human into compliance and conformity.
Mhm.
That's the standard kind of menu offering.
They love to use the word non-compliant. Oppositional defiant was a big one that was talked about a lot for kids that were having trouble complying. My experience towards the end of my school career was at a local magnet school that was kind of a creative school with a lot of arts, like artsy kids and really unique programs and even some programs that were more vocational. So it was a really bizarre blend of kids because it was so like the norm was to be unique and different and quirky.
Yeah.
So it was very different, bizarre in that it was very different from like a public school.
Yeah.
But I remember at the end, is the very end of my school career, I remember thinking to myself, wow, this is a school with no bullying. This is a school, none. I mean, zero, none,
Yeah.
never once did I see
Believe
bullying.
it. Mhm.
And I saw kids, kids are wearing banana costumes and kids are wearing the most eclectic clothes you've ever seen. They're
Yeah.
dancing in the cafeteria. It was just like neurodivergent Disney World to me. It was
Yes.
just, I've never felt more comfortable somewhere.
Yes.
But the awareness that that can exist was really jarring to me, is that
Mm.
I had even drank the Kool-Aid a little bit for so many
Sure.
years in public school going, "Well, we can't there's only so much we can do," and then seeing like, well, actually, there's actually a lot that we can do to make people feel safe and to make people feel seen and have their strengths be appreciated. And once you see that that's a thing, I almost couldn't go back to anything else. Like, I had a really hard time staying even at that school because I realized, so many of the things that I believed were wrong and just
Sure.
not being carried out. So I wonder how did you feel your kind of view of schools in general changed over time?
I've had a very similar experience, not from working personally in such a different environment, but from one of my kids attends a farm school, which you can imagine is quite different. And
Wow.
it's different in literally every regard, obviously, than a public school. I mean, we pursued it knowing that better and different had to exist, but
Yeah.
living it and experiencing it alongside her has been so validating and also eye opening. And it similar to you, it's just kind of brought to life this idea that there isn't actually a default way of organizing a school, of
Mm-mm.
designing a school experience. And actually, the default way, to the extent there exists one now that we're using, is so antithetical to human development and
Yeah.
well-being, and that the pain points are felt most critically by those who fall farther outside of the median that's being
Yeah.
touted as the way to be and pursued as the gold standard version of a human, but it doesn't serve anyone well, but it's felt most acutely by those who diverge more and they're paying the price of, it working well enough for those closer to the median. And that's, kind of upholding the status quo. But being in a place where difference is the norm, difference is expected, difference is valued, changes the game completely. And in a public school, it's simply not the case. It's not um, even purported to be the value, and it's certainly not the norm. I mean, it's a standardizing machine, public
Yeah.
schools,
Yes.
and it doesn't have to be. And I'm not like generally just anti-public school. I think
Right.
it makes a lot of sense to have public schools and to have them be places for safety and learning and well-being.
Yeah.
But they're not right now for so
No.
many, and it's unacceptable.
So tell me about this school. What does that look like for your kiddo to go to such a unique program?
It's incredible. It has like a kinda one-room schoolhouse sort of setup, so there's 15 to 20 kids total, basically elementary age type kids. It's kinda like a micro school situation where they have various, reading, writing, math, science, social studies, they have a schedule they follow, they have times for all those subjects.
Mhm.
They have an art teacher, a music teacher, they have a movement, like PE type, time in their schedule, so, it kind of pursues a lot of the same learning objectives, but in a
Mhm.
completely different social and environmental context. And
Okay.
so it's on 20 acres, and there's many goats and sheep and dogs and cats that roam around,
Oh, I would love
alongside you throughout the day.
Yeah,
Um, and it just changes the entire, you know, energetic tenor of it all, which, especially for neurodivergent people and autistic people, that's everything. Um,
everything.
so
Yeah.
it's really completely different.
I feel like any of the children in my house would learn better with an animal nearby. So
Same.
much better,
Yep.
and myself included in
Yep.
that.
Same.
Wow. So that's fantastic. I can't even imagine. And we're starting to see there are some new offerings when it comes to education. And I love the idea of looking at this different ways. Now that I work with adults, I'm fascinated by the different stories that I hear people say, when they describe how education worked for them. And I've heard everything from Montessori programs being really helpful and that they had choice and autonomy, and that really fueled them. And I've seen other people where that doesn't go well at all and they need more structure and they need a different kind of support. But
Mhm.
here, what I see is we have some schools where there's kind of like a student governed kind of, you know, part of it. And that seems to be very interesting. I have some really self directed kids that do very
Mhm.
well at programs like that. Or I'm not seeing teens anymore, but a lot of the adults that I work with have had experiences like that. And then I've also seen people who, went to boarding school and said, I love the structure. I love that every day was the same. I love that my family was there. I mean, it's interesting. And it has really opened my eyes because it makes me really sure that there isn't one way to do this. There's just
Right.
the whole idea is that there is no right way and that we have to figure out what
Exactly.
works for our individual kiddo.
Absolutely. That's the none of it. There is no right way,
Yeah.
and there's no right way to be. So then that takes away a lot of the starting the game at step 20 where you're like, well, it has to be in a building like this, or it has to have these types of teachers, or it has to be this many hours. It's like, no, you start at square zero and you
Yeah.
build an experience that matches the human that you're building it
Yes.
for.
So I'm really interested in your experience. Like, what was education like for you growing up? And when in that process did you arrive at your own neurodivergence?
I was fortunate that the standard design of public schools well enough matched my operating style and checked a lot of boxes for me. So I loved the validation of being, you
Yeah,
know, in my own eyes and estimation and the feedback I got from my teachers that I cozied up to, like I was, one
absolutely.
of the best and brightest. Like
Yeah,
that daily affirmation for me really filled my bucket. And I was fortunate that, my learning style just aligned with the design of the public schools I was in.
yeah,
But it was no coincidence that I was absolutely obsessed with almost every teacher, in elementary school. And first of all,
yeah,
my mom was really involved in like the PTO and stuff and had some leverage and would make sure I didn't get like any of the strict teachers because I was
yes.
very sensitive.
Very
Um,
sensitive. Same here.
Surprising for an autistic person.
Yep.
I always had the warm and fuzzy teachers as they were available to have, and I was always obsessed with them, and it was seemingly mutual, and that worked out pretty well. The problem became when being on that way started to accumulate, and I know you
Yeah,
can relate to this as an autistic person that there's a finite capacity, and
yeah,
even in doing things that we love or that are rewarding in some way, you just can't pour from an empty cup, obviously, and that
yeah,
I did through middle and high school and college and grad school, and the perfectionism and the needing to um, belong from a place of achievement, that comes at a cost. And I think socially, I was always able to kind of hang in there. Like I always tell people, I felt like I was um, reliably at the bottom of the totem pole of like the popular group throughout
yeah.
my schooling.
Close enough. Yeah,
Yeah, so I was always able to, like, hang in there, but
yeah,
just barely. I struggled with, like, social injustice from a young age, so, like, seeing people be mistreated, even experiencing mistreatment, I I didn't understand it, and I couldn't accept it, and I had to
yes,
kind of speak out against it, and that obviously comes at a cost,
yeah,
in neuronormative groups. My schooling was, like, successful from the, outside in terms of, achievement and learning,
yeah,
but it it was me firing all on all cylinders nonstop. It didn't kind of blow up in a dramatic kind of way, but it
yeah,
it over time, like, my body kind of broke down with various
yeah.
ailments and, conditions and, "Oh, like, that's normal for a high schooler to have, like, ulcers." Yeah, like, okay, like, we don't need to wonder about that at all,
Yeah, no, that's
like,
fine. Totally, totally
yeah,
expected.
that's just what happens sometimes to a
Yeah.
10th grader.
Did you continue to face physical health struggles as you went through school?
I did, and it was always mysterious, just like a lot of GI distress,
Yeah,
like unexplained. And then there was just like a range of other kind of like, not great coping mechanisms that I would employ that, like physically come at a cost sort of thing. And so everything just made so much sense when I understood
Yeah.
that I'm not just sensitive as some kind of like personality quirk. Like I'm
Yes.
sensitive in my body. My
Everything.
every fiber of me
Yeah.
is sensitive, and it's not like a um I can't, like, turn it on and off, like, I'm not being sensitive, I just am sensitive, and if I experience something as a 10 instead of a 2, it's not because that's, like, me acting sensitive, it's like it registered physiologically as a 10 in the first place. So, anyway, that all made a lot of sense once I learned what it is to be autistic.
And how many times this happens in my house all the time, and I have to be like, hold on, hold on, hold on. Like, we don't know what it feels like to be another person. And adults are so good at being like, it's not that big a deal, or it doesn't hurt that bad, or, take a breath, things like that. And we
Right.
never stop to think, like, maybe it does hurt that bad. I remember that as a kid, like little things like, you get a splinter, or, there's like a cut, and being like terrified of whatever they're going to pour on it stinging, and
Yes.
all of those things. And everyone, I just remember it felt like my whole childhood. People were like, okay, calm down. Okay. And it was like
Yep.
something was going on there. I didn't like
Yeah.
the drama. I wasn't attention seeking, but like it genuinely felt terrible in a way that, now I look back and I go, no, I know that's real because there are terrible things that I don't feel at all that other people seem to think are these catastrophic, painful things. And I'm like, oh, I didn't think C-section, no big deal. I was back at it the next day. Like, I didn't think it was that bad. Other
Yeah.
things, but that paper cut, that's going to take me out. So just having that unique sensitivity that doesn't make any sense.
Totally. Oh, I
That.
relate to that so much. Yeah. I think this, like, prevailing idea that we can be the authority on someone else's experience is just like
Right.
it's in the air we breathe, and it's so infuriating and perplexing to many of
Yeah.
us autistic people who are like, how do you get the ego to presume that
Yeah.
you would know and then should judge and try to control
Yeah.
someone else's experience of the world?
I found that really tricky as a parent too, because I knew my experience was different and I wanted to so badly give that to my kids and just be open to whatever it was they were telling me and taking it at face value.
Mhm.
Well, we have one neurotypical child in this house who is probably like, who are these people and what goes on here? And to us, he seems so flexible and so just whatever about most things, which is none of us can understand. But, as a kid, he was actually the only one in the whole house that had so much trouble with medical stuff where, he would just get so over the top upset about shots or fluoride or whatever. And it was so funny because in all other ways, he was the most flexible. And it was actually my autistic kiddo who, and they could do anything. I felt like they could throw a brick at her face and she'd be like, it's not that bad. And everybody commented on it. So to see the two of them, like it was almost a direct opposite of what my experience was. Like my kiddo was,
Yeah.
one was really sensitive and the other was not. And it was hard between the two of them. Like she would turn to
Mm.
him and be like, it's not that big of a deal. Like,
Yeah.
and she was younger and it was a whole thing. But it did drive home the point that I think we're all just really experiencing our bodies very differently and our
Totally.
fears and our anxieties. And it made me, I don't know, it kind of felt validating over time. It was like, okay, maybe it's just all right that we're just living differently.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's liberating. If we
Yeah.
can that's what, like, I try to preach to people, like, if like, this whole neurodiversity, like, concept, it's
Yeah.
actually gonna set you free because
Yes.
it's gonna change the game in terms of what you think is right or acceptable or what you're striving for, like, just strive to be you.
Yeah.
It actually is that
So much
simple.
easier. Yeah. It's really freeing when you can step away from your own constructs that you grew up with. Like you mentioned, schooling being a safe place for you and it sounds like an exciting place for you to learn. I felt very similarly, and it hasn't been that way for some of our kids. And it actually is incredibly freeing to not hold them to the same standards that I thought I
Totally.
had to. Like I didn't know you could get B's. Like
Right,
that may no one said that to me. That was never said to me. But,
right.
that why would anybody go to school and not be the smartest and not be doing the most and
Yeah.
all of that? And
Yeah,
now to see my own kiddo, kind of detach herself in some way from a framework that I was really living by,
yeah.
I look at it and go, that is beautiful. Like you are not those grades. That is not who you are.
Exactly. Well, yeah, I couldn't relate more, and I feel like in a lot of ways our kids' experiences have, like, expanded our worldview and added colors that we didn't know were part of the human
Yes.
experience, like we just how
Yes.
limited to feel that your kind of role on this earth and your value is the grades you get. It like worked for me, but like in a dimmer world, turn all the lights on and see things totally differently is really refreshing and exciting.
It really is. It's funny. I think the flip side of thinking grades were everything, when I got into the real world with my super grades, it meant nothing.
Right.
It meant
Right.
I was like, here's me at 24 going, "Wait a minute, like, no one is asking what my GPA was."
Right,
No
right.
no one
But
I
guys,
am
it was,
I
like, really good. Yeah.
and I'm like, "Did do we what do you mean?" Somebody told me to take it off of my resume, and I was like, "Over my dead body.
Yeah.
I worked hard for that." "What do you mean?" They're like, "You don't care. They don't care. You're an adult now." And I'm like, That can't be true." And
Right.
then lo and behold, all the people I knew who were having way more fun in high school than I was just kept getting better and better jobs, and I was like,
Right.
"Oh, this is
Well,
disappointing."
it's funny because it's a good example because I still think we could, like, rightly choose to put it on our, like, tombstones,
Yeah,
Like, we could
I love
we
it.
could definitely still advertise that as, like, a really important thing about us,
Yeah.
and that's okay to have been important to us or for
Yes,
us for some period of time or for all of time. Like, I think,
really
like,
was.
the beauty of yeah, and same, and I think the beauty of neurodiversity and this
Yeah,
movement is, like, you do you. Like, yes, that was important to you and for you. That makes total sense that it was, and good for you. Like, you identify with something that and it served you really well, and, like, I'm happy for you,
yeah,
and
yeah.
it doesn't have to mean a single thing to anybody
Mm.
else.
Looking back, I think the lens of autism has been so helpful because I look back at it now and go, it wasn't that the A mattered. It was a feedback loop. It was like, you're okay. You're smart. You're good at something. You're the kid that blank, and I've seen
Exactly.
that happen now. I see that with a lot of teenage girls where, they get a B and then they have an existential, disaster
Right.
happening because they're like, no, wait, I am the kid that doesn't get B's. And that's the part that I just wish I had a handle on then, is recognizing like the reason I was doing it was not the best, because I
Same.
needed that, you're okay, you have an identity, you know who you are in some capacity. And now in
Right.
adulthood, it's great to be like, oh, okay, that you know what, there's so many ways you can get that, but I did not have that in my teens, 20s, 30s. I mean, that was still
Right.
very alive. Did you feel anything similar to that?
Oh, 100%. I knew when I was getting my A pluses and A's that, like, that meant I was valuable and
Hmm.
and right and good,
Yep.
and, I really struggled in grad school. This is funny. You can probably relate with, a lot of grad schools, especially in our kind of fields, I think they might have, like, a minimum
Yeah.
grade requirement just to pass, and so I think everyone had to have, like, an average of a B or even a B plus or something or higher, and
Yeah.
I really struggle with that, like, this idea of watering down the value and concept of a
Yes.
grade, and I'm like, as I
Yeah.
was clinging so desperately to it, and I
Yeah.
understand now, like, why I can
Yeah.
unpack that, but it's such a good illustration of, like, slowly but surely grades not meaning anything because it's like, before there was this big range of grades you could get, and
Yeah.
now we're only even gonna issue basically like one or two of these grades, and then there are no grades, there's just actual, like, quality of the work you do or just how
Yeah.
you treat other humans and how you make other people feel and vice versa in the real world, and that can be a steep drop off for those of us who
Yeah.
clung to, the tangible
Yeah.
feedback of correctness.
Yeah. Yeah. It was like, why don't you just take everything? Like, okay, so now what do I do with myself? Yeah.
Right,
Oh my
right.
gosh. When did the full neurodivergent picture come into focus for you?
Similar story for so many of us I know. I have 2 girls, both autistic, and, once our older daughter was identified, we kind of figure that out alongside professionals, and as we did, I learned, again, like, what it is to be autistic from autistic people, and once I got that clarity, and not the medicalized, definition from non-autistic people, once I had the clarity of what it actually is, there's no question to me, like, "Oh, of course I'm
Yeah.
autistic." First of all,
Right.
like, genetics, like, this makes sense. You have an autistic child, like,
All of this lines up. Yeah.
yeah, she got her DNA from somebody. It just made perfect sense, and, my husband's an ADHDer, and, like, we were just learning about neurology in general, and,
Yeah.
we didn't know why no one had spoken about it before because it seems pretty important, and it's, our being and it's our culture, and we're still on the journey, but it's just been such a liberating and enlightening and exciting and fascinating process of making sense of how we move through the world and experience it
Yeah.
and one another. And so then I pursued like a formal identification or
Yeah.
diagnosis. Once we had our second daughter, I realized that it was important to me to cultivate a positive autistic identity in my
Yeah.
kids. And I felt like the world shies away from, at the very least, acknowledging and identifying autistic people, and I wanted to, like, run towards it, like, do the very opposite. And
I love
so
that.
I wanted to show them in action that, like, this is something we don't, you know, hide from or walk away from. This is actually something we run to and lean into
Yeah.
and seek out, and so I did that, and it's just been an important kind of building block of that identity building, I think, for all of us.
Did you go through a period of time where you felt like you were experiencing grief after finding out?
Think it's been like drips of grief.
Yeah.
It hasn't at least yet, kinda hit me all at once, but I've had moments on most days where I've, had some kind of, recollection of my earlier life and realized like, "Oh my gosh, like, if only they had known, if only I had known, like, so much would have been different and so much suffering would have been spared." And so I do kind of feel for myself, for my younger self, for my current self that's built
Yeah.
on top of that younger self.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you and so many others can relate.
Oof. Yeah.
And it's a lot to kind of um process
Mhm.
and move forward from. Um but I think, I obviously have compassion and clarity surrounding all the people and places, in my earlier life or people kind of couldn't know better and
Yeah.
wouldn't have been able to know better. I have a lot less patience and compassion now,
Mhm.
um, for kind of willful ignorance among professionals um, and family members and people who are
Yeah.
unwilling to challenge their thinking and their biases and
Yeah.
know better and do better.
I think it's a weird experience. I think is you're the longer that you're in this community and you are, connecting with other people who get it, who are like-minded, who are open-minded, who are curious, all of that.
Mhm.
It exposes you to this whole different way of connecting, I think, and
Yeah.
like a safety maybe. It almost like simultaneously I'm just like I can't tolerate people
Yeah.
that aren't forcing themselves to be curious. Like even if you're
Yeah.
not naturally curious, can you try? Like can
Right.
you can
Right.
you take a step for all of us
Do you
because
want to be? Or,
yeah,
like, even, like yeah, at a certain point, it kind of distorts your, sense of humanity in the world
yeah,
in a somewhat good way when you're interacting with people who are on the same kind of train as you are. Even if
yeah.
you're kind of at different stations, you're at least, like, heading in a similar direction. And so then it can be even more startling when you and
Yeah,
jarring when you interact with the majority of the world who is
yeah.
not aware of or interested in becoming aware of this kind of like human rights crisis.
And I think being around other people who understand it, it just cultivates compassion. Like the
Mhm.
compassion of others seeps into compassion for yourself and for your kids and for everybody.
Yep.
I feel like I have so much more compassion for my kids' teachers now than I ever did because I've
Sure.
seen how hard the system is for them too. And just, even some of the people that I wish were doing more, I still think to myself, you know what? I had a reason that I had to learn all of this. I had a very clear little human reason in front of me that made this essential. And then
Right.
once that happened, it wasn't even a question for me. And I get it. It's work, it's time, it's, effort, but it's critical because it's not just my kid or your kid or anybody's kid, so many people. And I think it's just grossly underreported and underdiagnosed. And if people realized how many neurodivergent people were amongst them, I think it would seem like a really obvious answer that we need to do better.
Yeah, and I can't help but want to tell so many of my kids' teachers, like, by the way, like you're
Mm.
autistic and
Yeah.
it's glorious. Just like let it
Yeah.
just lean in and like learn from some other people. Like you're gonna love it. Like it's
Yeah.
really it's
Yeah.
better on the other side.
So much better
Um,
on the other side.
but
So much better. It's so
there's
true.
so many professionals that we interact with on a daily basis where we're like,
Mhm.
the great irony of the fact that these people are
Oh,
neurodivergent and disabled, like the children
fighting
that
it.
misunderstanding and
Mhm.
discussing, like,
Yeah.
we just wanna tell them, like, this conversation even right now would go like, in a meeting, like, would go so much better if you had
Yeah.
any clue who
Yep.
and what you were, and,
Yep.
like,
So true.
it would
It's
just
so
we would
true.
all be so much more effective in
Yeah.
addition to more, like, peaceful and joyful.
Oh my gosh, 100%. So I think your work is so inspirational. I would love for you to talk a little bit about what you're doing. I have a little piece of your website that I just thought was amazing. Um, the part where you said we work to create the conditions where thriving is possible by helping families, professionals, and communities understand, normalize, and value neurodivergent and disabled lives. We provide care that sees and values the whole person, and we amplify and center the voices of those who are marginalized. We are unwavering in our commitment to allow every person to live freely and authentically because thriving is a human right. Oh, what a beautiful thing to see in print on any website. So tell me about the work that you're doing now and where this all came from.
Well, thank you for reading that because those words really are like, at the core of my heart. And so anything on my website is like a direct extraction from like the core of
Mhm.
me. And so I love to think about it and hear about it, to talk about it. So my practice ND3 supports, as you had mentioned, families and professionals who are looking to better understand and support themselves or one another. And it's named ND3 because of the kind of three neurodivergent perspectives I bring to my work and to my life, which is, as a neurodivergent autistic person myself, as a parent to autistic and multiply neurodivergent kids, and as a school psychologist who, for 15 years in schools has supported neurodivergent kids. And so anything I do, anywhere I go, I really I can't help but I also intentionally merge those 3 kind of
Yeah.
neurodivergent perspectives. I think in doing so, what I strive to do is to see people really clearly and from like kind of in this kind of 360-degree way where I can situate their experiences in these various contexts and I can imagine and understand how various systems and relationships would impact them and form kind of the person they are, the daily experiences they have, wear all those hats simultaneously as I work to support people.
I love that so much. And you were made to do this. I can speak from experience and this is hilarious, but when I had some things going on with my kiddos' school and you would think that if you have a background working in the schools, they'd be like, "Ooh, let's do things the right way." Nope, no. And so I
Oh, boy.
knew
Yeah.
that I was not going to be able to sit at this table and regulate my own nervous system because these meetings are incredibly upsetting to me
Yeah.
because I
Same.
just can't hear people say, "We can't do that. That's not something we do," when you know that they can. So I was speaking to our mutual friend, Rabbi Shoshana, and I said, I'm drowning. I don't know what to do. Like, I want someone to come in and just absolutely level this team. I'm so angry. I'm so hurt. And she was like, so maybe you should talk to Jenna. And I was like, I need someone to come in and be nasty and aggressive and like lay down the law. And she was like, maybe talk to Jenna. And I was like, okay, I forgot Jenna did that. And so I did. And oh my gosh. And I have to say, like, I was so hurt and so angry by so many things that were happening because the mama bear comes out and you're just ready to take on the world for your
Oh, yeah.
kid.
I know.
But you know what? It was such a life lesson because I watched you come into this team with all of this background and all of this patience and understanding. And the way that you navigated this meeting, I told everybody afterwards, I was like, this must be what it feels like to have a wife because I felt like there is something about your approach that was both like direct and gentle, and there was like you were so informed and just so well spoken but also like soft spoken and like not nasty and not aggressive, and people listened. And I watched everybody at the meeting hear what you were saying, and they changed their course and brought it back up in further meetings. And it's just a reminder, I think, for a lot of neurodivergent people, we feel outrage is very connecting, we feel it very strongly, we have that fairness button that just gets punched all the time. And it's really hard to be unemotional when it's your kid. And I was just so grateful to watch you do your thing firsthand because it changed the whole course of the meeting, really, to have someone to like back me in the things that I was saying, to be knowledgeable, but also just stand up when there was an obvious right answer that they were ignoring and just say, hey, that there is an answer, there is something else we could look at. and it changed things for my kid. So I completely respect the way that you work and the way that you do that. I wonder what it feels like for you to be on the other side of the table now.
Yeah, it is really empowering to um, be in this different seat in these IEP meetings now. Because as I kind of said in the beginning when we were talking about my school career, I kind of operated the same way when I was working as a school psychologist.
Yeah,
It just brought a lot of problems for me because I
yeah,
was passionate and candid and um, unafraid. I think like so many of us autistic people, I could see so crystal clearly, um, kind of the justice of the situation and what was accurate and right
yeah,
to think and do in the meetings. And so to be able to do that without kind of fear of repercussions, and to also be in a position with more leverage, because I was just kind of the school psychologist who like was on a mission to liberate all the kids and like, all right, we'll let her talk. But now it's like a parent who could not possibly be more invested and care more about their precious child, um, is inviting you to speak in a capacity that could impact their child, and that's a huge responsibility. And school teams know that, like, if that person was brought in like intentionally, like they're going to need to listen to some degree. And
yeah,
so, no matter who I am or how I worked, I think there's a different kind of leverage there just in fulfilling
yeah,
that role. But it's so um, empowering and rewarding to be kind of openly partnered with families. And I think it doesn't have to be an us versus them, but the reality is that it often is. And
yeah,
school teams are not often partnering with families as equal team members, which they are legally designed and designated to be. And so, given the reality of the dynamic most of the time, I think it's so important to have that other person in your corner. And I can speak to personally the experience of being in an IEP meeting for your own child and having them misunderstood, mistreated, their needs dismissed or
yeah.
mischaracterized. It's too much. It's too much for
Yes.
any human to
Oh my gosh.
effectively or healthily cope with
Yeah,
in the moment. Forget like, to be productive and to achieve
yeah.
whatever goals you have for that meeting. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
mischaracterizing is such a great way of putting it. I find that that's the thing that always makes me just so angry about my own kiddo is that they'll pull these data points of like, she's on her phone during the school day. And I'm like, yes, that is how we regulate. That is how
right,
we take
right,
ourselves
right,
mentally from a place that is terrible for her body to a mental
right.
place where she can cope. And well, she's just on TikTok. She absolutely is. You are so right. And
100%.
let me ask
Yeah,
you a question. When you finish your day, and
right.
you're trying to check out, where do you go on your phone? Oh, okay.
Exactly.
Like, do you ever do that during your lunch break? Do you ever do that in the bathroom? Do you ever do okay, so, like,
Right.
she's not a monster. That is a thing that she's doing to try and cope, and
I was
so
just
let's
gonna
under
say, you're humanizing her, and
Yes!
by that, you're not, distorting, you're revealing the
Yes.
human of her inherent humanity that pervades all of the human things she does.
So human, just so human. And it's amazing. I really I find it so fascinating, and this is just the one thing, and I know you get this. One of the biggest interventions that helps these kiddos is just a safe person. Like
Yeah,
most of the time, parents are not asking for these like extra schools and, these like private school experiences or special transportation or a one-to-one. Most of the time, it's not that. It's can I please give my kid a safe place to go so that they can be themselves and get what they need without having to explain it to everybody in full public view all the time. And
yep,
I'm just always shocked at how little it actually takes to give that to kids. I mean, the interventions they've put in place for her have been minimal. I mean, absolutely
right,
minimal, but also life changing. And
right,
so, you know that, I know that, and I think the schools want to make it seem sometimes like, oh, we just absolutely couldn't do that. And the reality is we can. Like we can
right.
find those safe people and help these kids.
Right. Yep. It's about relationships. Always has been, always will be. One of the first things I ask parents when we're preparing for an IEP meeting is about the goals of that they have in mind for it. And I always kind of drill down. It's like, okay, so when you talk about maybe you think your child might require a benefit from OT or speech or counseling, whatever it is, tell me what you know about the specific people at that child's school. Like,
Yes.
what do you know about their OT or their
Yeah.
speech pathologist or their like I need all the information I can get
All the
to know whether
details.
this is worth
Yeah.
pursuing? Is this gonna be beneficial or harmful or a mix of both? And because it's 100% about the safety that person can or won't
Yeah.
create for your child, and I think we forget, especially school professionals, the humanity of the babies. Like, some of the babies are small, they're like
Yep.
five-year-old babies, and some of the babies are bigger, they're like, they've been on the planet for 16 years. Okay, they're
Yep.
babies still.
Yep.
You're caring for them. This is still childcare. Part of caring for children is making sure they, feel comfortable, and, like, so, like, let's not pretend that they're in a factory where they need to be plugged into some kind of intervention for a certain number of minutes and then unplugged to return them to another room. It's just about caring for humans. Yeah.
Yeah. One of your offerings on your website that I just am dying to know, you have what's called a Kahoo course, and I'm curious if you could explain what that is to our listeners.
Yeah, I it's one of my biggest passions in the work that I do. Awesome Training is an organization based in Ireland. So it's run by autistic people, by Evelyn Welton. They created this parenting program for parents of autistic young people, children or teens. It's a 5 consecutive week course, 2 hours per week. I'm offering it virtually nowadays. It is an opportunity to understand your child or young person from the inside out, and it's an
Oh,
opportunity to understand what being autistic means from autistic people, to kind of restory and reframe your entire kind of narrative about what it is to be autistic and about your young person themselves. It's also an opportunity to, alongside this instant kind of community that gets built, like it's an intentionally small program limited at 12 people per round, to problem solve daily life and to think through how can we actually craft a daily life for our particular family that is sustainable and healthy and joyful and productive in the ways that are important to you and meaningful. And so it really goes from the broad to the specific of kind of worldview philosophy of human differences and being autistic,
yeah.
down to the nitty gritty of like calendars. How do you manage your child's daily schedule? Like, do you
Yeah.
have those kind of peaks and valleys where they do an activity and there's time built in to regulate? There's kind of
Yeah.
life hacks from autistic people
Oh, I love it.
about kind of how to craft a life that actually works, as opposed to conforms to a certain default or ideal that was created by someone unlike you who doesn't understand
Yes.
you. So, it's
Yes.
starting from a totally different place and brings
Oh, I love
people
that.
along that journey.
I feel like that is just the most valuable resource you could offer to a family too, is that like, "Hey, I'm gonna sit in this with you. I'm gonna help you get tools and structure and understanding, and at the end of this, like, your kid is still your kid. Like,
Totally.
we're not changing your kid. You're not getting a different kid just because we have a label. Now we're just understanding better what we probably didn't understand before."
Exactly. Yeah, it's a meaning making kind of journey.
So, I am curious, for you in your life right now, what is bringing you autistic joy at the moment?
Oh my gosh, so many things. In my autistically, like, detail-oriented way, my first thought was that one of my daughters and I have had a routine the last week since my husband got, flowers. Every
Mhm.
morning, she wants to, like, check on the smell of the flowers, and we, like,
Oh,
rate and, like, order the sunset colored flower, as she calls it, because it has, like, reds and orange and yellows and versus
so
the
cute.
red versus the pink, and, like, it's little routines like that
So
that
great.
are, like, predictably soul-filling. Like, I
Ugh,
love that both my kids are autistically attuned to all of the sensory details of the world and that they care about them and that those things impact their lives in the ways that they do, and I relate to that, and,
yes.
so little routines like that with my kids, but then also just my own little, 9 to 11 p.m., like, peaceful safe
Yep.
haven of life that is typically filled with music and reality TV and
Yes.
iPad games and just, like, some kind of, delightful snack, like, all merged into one
Beautiful.
2-hour block of joy.
You were leaning all the way into the joy block there. That is so good.
Exactly, I just check all the boxes at once and just fire on
All at one
every
time.
joyful cylinder, yeah. And then my last little thing I would say is that, I've always loved to dance, and I did hip hop dancing, like, as a younger person.
Wow.
But I've been doing hip hop dancing as an adult now the last couple of
Look at
years,
you.
which has been the best, and I have a totally different lens on it now, knowing I'm autistic and how, like,
Yeah.
integrating our body and
Oh my
mind
gosh.
and, like, in music, yeah, it's just, like,
I
it's
love
all
it.
just so glorious.
I love that. We went roller skating recently with the kids, which I used to do a ton when I was younger. And
Nice.
I was looking at it that same day. I was like, oh, yeah, this is why you liked this. Like, this is the
Right.
most sensory joy you can
Oh,
feel.
the
And it took
flow
me
state.
right back. Yes.
Yeah,
Like, I was just
yeah,
like, watch out, kids. I'm like
yeah.
weaving in and out like it's 1989 and I have like neon
Yeah,
pink from head to toe. It was
love
so
it.
great. And the
Oh,
kids
that's
loved
so
it
great.
too. I was like, look at us. What a happy little family we are. And
I know, isn't it great when you have those moments? Yeah, and you can just, like,
yes.
re-story your whole life based on those 18 minutes. It's yeah.
Like, now I get it.
Yes.
Like, this body needed to move.
Yes.
It was a thing for sure. Well, if people wanna learn more about all the amazing things you're doing, they can find you at nd3.org. That's your website, and that's where you offer these classes. That's where you offer consults for parents, for families, and direct services and all of those wonderful things. And then you're also ND3 on Facebook, is that right?
Yes.
Perfect. And then if they want to email you, it's jenna@nd3.org. And anything that you're working on right now that you want to tell us about?
We have some presentations and courses and offerings. Got a presentation coming up for AANE, with Rabbi Shoshana Friedman, who's the
Yes.
creator of the PDA Safe Circle. Is an amazing resource for PDAers and their family
Amazing.
and adult PDAers. She and I created a course called The School Question, which I know we talked a lot about school today.
Mm.
The school question broadly means, like, what do we do about school for
Oh,
X neurodivergent or disabled kid? It has a PDA kind of lens to it, but it's not only
mhm.
for those who are PDAers or who have been identified that way. It's really thinking through kind of the big picture of what role does school play and why are we at the point we're at right now with how school is organized and what can we or should we do about that, down to the kind of nitty-gritty of, my child is something's not working about their school situation. What can I do as
Sure.
a parent to advocate? 504 stuff, IEP stuff, a lot of granular kind of tips and ideas. So,
Love it.
um, that's just available on demand. And yeah, otherwise I'm here to help.
Amazing. Love this so much. Cannot recommend you enough. People should check out your online, all of your things on your website. And I think it will make your heart feel so good. Everything in there is just so affirming and so beautiful and so wonderful. You make me want to be a better person and a better professional, all the things. So I
Likewise.
really appreciate you being here. You are like one of my heroes in the field. It makes me
Oh
so
my
happy to know
gosh.
you're doing this work.
That is so generous and kind, and I'm thrilled to know you and to admire you and respect you and learn from you, and thank you so much for having me. I was looking forward to this for so long. Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening. If this episode resonated with you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. If you'd like to learn more about high masking, late diagnosed autism, check out our Instagram @neurocorious. And if you're interested in getting all the details of our unmasking retreats, please check out my website, CoreyAndreas.com. You can also find more content on our YouTube channel @That'sMePod. And if you haven't already, please subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts so you don't miss an episode. We can't wait to see you next time.